on Zoom and Facebook. Welcome everybody. We've got participants now trickling in. I want to start out with a special thanks to everyone for tuning in and giving your time and attention, and especially for taking the time to figure out how to make your program better and learn from some of the experience of others. So today we are doing our first session of Hard Lessons Learned. Hard Lessons Learned is going to be all about a series we'll put together. It's going to be about operators in the public safety space sharing with others their experiences that they learned the hard way. And we're doing this in a way that others can understand what went wrong, how it went wrong, and how they can implement some things in their own programs to make sure that this doesn't happen to them. So today is Hard Lessons Learned, Drones and Wind. We have Bruce Sandy with us. Bruce Sandy is with the Pender Fire and EMS. He's going to be talking to us today about an incident that took place off the coast of North Carolina. So do want to say big thanks, Bruce, for joining us. And during this presentation, if anybody has questions, please go ahead and drop your questions into the Q&A section. Myself and Antonio, who's joining us, we'll do our best to kind of guide and direct and present these questions to Bruce while he's sharing this story. So at this time, Bruce, thanks for joining us. We're really looking forward to hearing and learning from what you share.
Thanks, Paul. I want to say to everyone that's on the webinar, thank you for coming and taking the time to hear our story. I hope that what we have to share with you today can help you avoid some of the trials that we had in this particular event. At the end, my information will be there. If we don't get your answers to any of your questions today, or you have follow-up, always reach out to me with an email. If I don't get back to you immediately, I promise I will. Sometimes I get busy, but I definitely want to share anything we can to help out. So, as Paul said, my name is Bruce Sandy. I'm the UAS Program Manager at Pender County Fire. I have been the program manager there since basically since Hurricane Florence, after Hurricane Florence. My background, 21 years in public safety. I've worked both in public and private positions with software companies, as well as in law enforcement and emergency response, emergency services. The way I got to be a UAS program manager was right after Hurricane Florence, somebody rolled in a 200 into my office and dropped it on the floor and said, "You're now the program manager. Establish this program." I didn't know anything about UAS. I had to, I was behind the eight ball. I had to learn, right? So we took that program and we started working with it. We put some pilots together who are absolutely extraordinary individuals. If you ever get to meet any of the folks on my team, they're the ones that always make us look good, right? So we started to set up the program based off the equipment that was there. And I talk about this sometimes. That is the absolute wrong order of operations. You should figure out what your program looks like, and you should define your mission set before you ever get to buying what equipment you're going to buy. When we finally got to the right side of what we were doing, we defined our mission sets as ISR, search and rescue, situational awareness, technical advantage. We work with our law enforcement partners on technical advantage. For them, we work with our emergency management folks on technical advantage. We're very embedded in our forestry partners with wildland, fire. We do some accident recreation, and we do a lot of PSA documentation. If you have a drone program, what you figure out pretty quickly is they can become unpopular. So we spend some time trying to educate the community on, what we can do, what we can't do, what we're about. And you'll see some of that as we kind of go forward today. So the craft that I was flying on this particular day was a 210V2 with these two cameras. So I show you this because it becomes important later in our findings. We had an XT2, at that time, about a $14,000 camera, and we had a Z30 at that time was about a $4,000 camera as payloads on the bird. So that'll become important in a minute. On 2/27, February 27th, 2020, Pender EMS and Fire was requested to document a training exercise between the following agencies: City of Wilmington Fire, New Hanover County Sheriff's Office, Wrightsville Beach Fire, Pender EMS and Fire, Pender County Sheriff's Office, and the U.S. Coast Guard and U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary. Now, here's the way that works. So we have a pretty robust swiftwater team, and our swiftwater team will go out and train. And what they did is they took our swiftwater team out on boats and basically threw them in the water. And they simulated a boat explosion and right outside the inlet of a place called Wrightsville Beach, which is a beautiful place if you ever get to visit. And so they were in various locations, much like you would find if you rode up on the scene. And so these folks were all in their own stations and had to be dispatched. So you had about a 10 to 15 minute response time for these folks to start getting on scene. So we threw our people out. They were kind of doing what they did. Folks start getting on scene, radio traffic starts happening, things get picked up. It's almost like your average ordinary day, which all these things are until they're not, right? You're always, it's always an ordinary mission until it's not. And when it goes extraordinary in a hurry. Our weather that day beforehand was a somewhat normal day. It was a windy day at the beach, but sustained winds you'll see in a minute were between 15 and 18 miles per hour sustained, gusts a little over 25 at ground level, and that becomes important. So when we got down there, I led a briefing where our briefings, I don't know how other people do it, but our briefings talk about what the mission is. We talk about safety, and we talk about ditch plans. We always have a ditch plan in place for if something happens. This is a location. Usually it's a halfback location. This is a location you can get to and you can land, and we'll go retrieve the bird however we need to. But kind of shoot for this as a backup plan. So we had a ditch plan, right? And you'll see in a second where that ditch plan was at. This is the weather for that day. If you look here, I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but this is the period of time where this mission happened, was between 9 and 10. And you can see we were starting to get some gusty winds. But again, within limits of what DJI says that drone should be able to handle at ground level. You can see inside of our software, we were actually seeing 15-mile-an-hour winds, 34% humidity. And I've included that humidity number for a reason, because the air wasn't that heavy. It made for a kind of a lighter, more easily maneuvered craft. I'm going to show you the telemetry in just a second, but basically this is sort of what happened. I took off from the beach to head to the scene of the incident, and you can kind of see here where we took off from and where the scene of the incident was, which was about 7,300 feet from where we took off, which is not out of the realm of possibility to fly under normal conditions. Sorry about that, guys. Under normal conditions. This particular day, it turns out it was more than what we could do. As I was flying out, I was paying attention way more probably to to what was going on in the water. I was paying attention to where boats were. I was paying attention to what I was going to, and I did not necessarily pay attention to what my craft was doing, and that was my first mistake. As I got out pretty fast, I realized that I was burning battery at a significant rate, and I turned the boat around to start bringing it back towards the beach, and I was making no headway. The gust at that point had gotten over 45 to 50 miles an hour at about 125 feet. I was making no headway coming back. So I radioed the boats in the field, kind of let them know I was having issues, hold position, and I was going to try to move back home. And I did that so that they could be aware of where I was in case I had a problem. I didn't hurt anyone. Wasn't able to make ground, and so we have emergency procedures within our group. We run at least a three-man group on missions. In this particular case, there was 6 people there. Somebody was acting as an air boss. I let the air boss know I was having trouble. He came to assist. We kind of were talking through what our options were. And the only option I had was to get as close to the water as I could start working my way back. But at that point, I had exhausted too much battery. In the findings later, we'll talk about this a little bit, but the 4th minute into that mission, I was too far gone to come home based off the parameters of the craft, parameters of the burn, the parameters of that day. I was too far gone to be able to make it home. But I still flew for another 16 or so minutes trying to get home. And later on, you'll find out that was all for kind of not. So I was not able to make it back, so I started to implement my ditch plan. I wasn't able to get back to my ditch plan. My ditch plan was to land somewhere on these rocks right here. What you kind of can't see is this is rocks that come up out of the ocean pretty far, and there's enough flat spaces that you can kind of land there. My plan was to try to work back there. I wasn't able to make enough headway to get back there. So my kind of third option was to land on the roof of a 41-foot Coast Guard boat. Called the Coast Guard boat, told them to straighten out, just keep a steady course, and I would land from behind them. We have actually practiced this before with some Coast Guard missions. If you've ever heard me talk about the Sea Angels project that we did, that was a 80-foot shrimp boat that got stuck in a little minefield, and we had to do some documentation for them. We did a lot of landing on boats that were moving, so it wasn't abnormal to me to want to land on that boat. But as it were, I swung around behind the boat, tried to make an approach to the roof, and just too much wind. It was just too much to try to hold. So I made a second round, and I literally got within about 5 feet of landing, and the battery's just exhausted. And it was the most humiliating, if you will, feeling watching the craft head for the water, and you can see the people on the boat reaching out to try to grab it, and they're literally just feet away and they can't get to it. We were that close to managing to pull it off. So that's kind of what happened. I'm going to switch screens here for a second. What I will play for you now, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to point out a few things, but this is the actual flight from where I took off the beach, right? So I want to point out a couple of things before I go very far. First thing you'll notice, where's my battery at? I wasn't at 100% when I left. I had done some reconnaissance flights that morning to spot some things out, spot the ditch plan. So I had filmed the ditch plan so I could show it to the team, and I just overlooked it. And this is why it's important to pay attention. I didn't replace those batteries, so when I took off, I was already at 72% when I left the beach. So I'll put it in gear here. I'll have you watch the speed at which I am leaving the beach and heading out. You'll see I'm moving much faster than the craft has the capability of doing. Mind you, I am not in sport mode at this point. This is just regular flying, but that's the tailwind I had. The jerkiness is really from more just from the GPS. You can see at that point I'm going 66 miles an hour tailwind. I'm heading out at this point because our swimmers in the water are in this area right here. So I'm getting there as quickly as I can. There are two other drones in the air at this point. One is operating at like the 50-foot level. One is operating at about 125. So as I'm getting closer, you'll see that I climb so that I'm not in their airspace. But as you see it kind of playing out, there's still a lot of speed there. I'm going to speed this along a little bit. But you'll see that I get out there and I get on station, and still doing a lot of speed. Well, you see when I climbed the 200, at one point I registered 73 miles an hour, which is probably too fast for a drone to fly. But once I was there, by the time I made it to this point right here, it was too late for me to come home. This is when I realized I was in trouble, when I started trying to work my way back, and you can see I'm just not making any headway back very fast. At this point, I was documenting who was there. I kind of knew I was starting to be in trouble, but I was trying to work it out, that kind of thing. And I'm going to just go ahead and kick it along here so I don't waste anybody's time. But at one point, and you can kind of see there, at one point, I can't make any headway back. That point right there, I am full thrust all the way back, and I'm not moving more than just 18 or 20 miles an hour. That should be nearly 2/3 of that. At that point, I think I even moved over to sport mode to try to get more power out of it. Just couldn't make the headway, right? So you'll see that you'll kind of see that there's some erratic maneuvering around. Some of that was I was just being blown against the wind. That when you see it blowing back like that, that's me taking my fingers off the sticks, and it just blows back against the craft. At one point, it was moving in the other direction, 20, 22 miles an hour, and that was just me taking my fingers off the stick. We all kind of know what happens here in the end. I'll save you the gory details. As it moves forward here, this is where I was trying to make an approach to the boat. I came around, didn't make it, came back around, and right there is where I was right at the boat, and it sort of drops out. This is where the crash happened. So at any rate, I went in the water here, and basically the rest of the team had brought their drones home because they were experiencing the same problems I was experiencing with wind. But they just, when I said, "Hey, I have a problem," they were probably 2,000 foot closer, and they were able to make their way home. But even probably my very best pilot said he almost didn't make it home. He was about 11% battery when he landed. So that point, so that's the telemetry, and I'll kind of stop. Is there any questions before I go into the lessons learned piece?
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, we haven't had anything pop up just yet. I think folks are very much focused in on kind of hearing and seeing how things went down. If anyone does have any questions, we've got.
Sure, I understand. And we can catch them at the end. That's no problem.
We had a question that asked, Alex asked, did you think about using the kill switch?
Kill switch to do what? I don't.
I'm not sure. If you could be more specific, Alex, if maybe he means like crossing, maybe hovering over the boat and like crossing sticks, kind of killing the motors, like over the boat.
No, because that's not a bad, that's not a bad suggestion. I appreciate that. The boat was moving at about 12 knots, 11 knots, so it's sort of the equivalent of trying to land a moving object on a moving object, and you're not at the object. So I didn't necessarily think about that, but I think my challenge would be hitting hitting it, not hitting the water, and not hitting anybody. Remember, these boats had people on them, so I had to not hit people in the same process. So that's a good question, though. I appreciate that. We'll talk about kind of what we did post-crash, and then kind of what we learned. I put this in I put this in everything that I do. Crashes happen to everyone if you fly long enough. If anybody is on here and they haven't had a crash yet, congratulations, your day's coming. Nothing personal, right? But this was my very first crash, and we had a team that a lot of people were looking at that thought that there was that we were a pretty stand-up group and that we were doing a lot of really great things, and so we had a lot of eyes watching us, and our political figures in our county weren't necessarily all that popular about what we were doing. So for me to park a $35,000 piece of equipment in the ocean, I already knew what the fallout of that was going to be. So for me, my heart sunk as it sunk, and it was hard. I mean, it was really hard for that. And so I was dealing with a lot at that time, but I think we did a lot of the right things, even though. So for the post-crash first hour, how you handle your crash will make your team better. It'll make you a better pilot. And quite honestly, it helps explain a lot of things off to folks like insurance people, county commissioners, things like that. It helps to go ahead and document those things and have them whenever you have to tell them, hey, I just wrecked this, but here's my report. So it makes you look like you're prepared. So we appointed someone to manage our incident after action. For us, we were using our air boss, who at that time was the division chief. So my boss and all this kind of stepped in to start handling things internally. We took immediate statements from everyone that was involved, right? So people on the boat, obviously the pilots, spectators. We collected, we tried to collect as much information as we could from weather service and things like that. So immediately we jumped on while it was fresh in everyone's mind. We started taking those statements and writing things down. We were able to recover some of our telemetry information, obviously, from our software, but our controller held some of the information from the bird. Obviously, we couldn't get to the bird to get all of the information off of it, but we could get some stuff from the controllers, and so we downloaded that into air data and looked at it. We downloaded, like I said, we collected weather information. We collected video information from other drones that were there. We collected all the sources we could. We had to report the incident to the proper authority. In this case was my chief, and he was super excited about what we had to report to him. He thought we were kidding and hung up on us. So he's just a good guy, right? He thought we were just messing around with him, and we called him back and told him we weren't messing around. And I'll never forget it, because he could have said a lot of things to me. He said, "You step out of the office. This is going to be fine. We got insurance. We're going to work through this." And at that point in time, if he would have yelled at me, I'd have probably died. So reporting to the proper authority. That authority in our case was the chief. It could have been the FAA. If someone had gotten hurt, It could have been the FAA. It could have been a medical situation. There's any number of things that could have happened. Something I didn't add here is I immediately had to go for a drug test. That's just our standard policy. So we immediately did the urine test. And the other thing that my boss did was sat me down, and when we got to the office and we kind of debriefed a little bit, he sat me down to really decide what the viability of my head was in continuing to fly. Was I at a place where I was ready to fly? And I wasn't. I'll be honest with you. I had a confidence problem, and I wasn't. Post-crash, 24 to 48 hours. My suggestion is to bring in an independent, non-biased third party or parties to review your incident. We ended up utilizing someone that we had learned a lot from. That was kind of a good trainer for us and helped us along in our program. Who really understood what we did. We brought them in and let them kind of work through their process, and they did interviews, and they interviewed every person again, and they collected the same information. We gave them the access to the equipment. We kind of did we kind of did all the things that we could do to support them in their process. And this is probably one of the most important things that we did, was bringing a third party in immediately to look at what we were doing to find out, did we really have it together and this was an accident, or were we just a bunch of cowboys? And the other thing that they did within 48 hours was, it's kind of like crawling on the horse. They took me back out to the same place where I had to fly over water, and they made me fly again, supervised, obviously, to get me back up and get me in that same environment. That was probably pretty important for my confidence as well. Post-crash 14, 21 days, the third party documented their findings. They compared statements from the scene to statements from the interview to see, did someone remember more? Did the story change? You're always kind of looking for, I hate to say it, you always got to look for impropriety because it's just nature of the beast. But in our situation, it wasn't about impropriety. It was about, did you remember something later? Did you see something you didn't see before? Did the post-action shock keep you from remembering something that later on you probably could have done better with? One of the things that we investigated heavily, because it's the fire service and this happens, is he was very concerned about determining was machoism the root cause of what our crash, and what was the health of our team. And there was some machoism there. I will tell you that if I went back to do it all over again, I remember having a conversation that morning with my deputy chief saying, it's kind of windy out here. I'm a little bit worried about this. And him saying, oh, don't worry about it. You got this. We're very good at what we do. And, this is not going to be a bad thing. If you don't feel comfortable, just come on home. Right. So a little machoism there. We made changes in our processes after that, and we'll kind of talk about that. We pulled the whole team back in, and we replayed the whole incident again. We talked about all of that, and we allowed the team to give, basically unbridled input. There are no wrong answers here. Tell me what you see here. Tell me what you think here. And if you don't feel comfortable about saying it in the room, write it down and give it to the division chief, because we need to know what your thoughts are. Everybody's thoughts are important in a situation like this. The least little thing could help. One of the things that I felt was very important was, folks had very non-threatening conversations with me, my chief, deputy, the division chief, when you have an incident, beating somebody over the head or yelling at them at the time doesn't do a thing to help them. There's no value in it whatsoever. Treating them like they did wrong, even if they know they did wrong, they own that. They know they crashed. They know they just put a $40,000 or $35,000 object in the water. They know that. You don't have to remind them of that constantly. Having open dialogue about safety and process is very important, because if you want people to accept it and you want them to be open to talk to you about it, you got to be non-threatening. We kind of pulled our stuff together. We had our training officer really document all the improvements that came from the third party, from the team. We put all that together, and then we got back together and we wrote that into our SOGs, and we developed timelines of training to improve those things. So the things that we identified specifically, we went back and had training for to address, and we have those in repetitive trainings going forward. Okay, our findings. Our findings were obvious. Pilot error was the cause for the accident. Conditions were not suitable for the mission at the time. 50-mile-an-hour gust at 200 feet, 55-mile-an-hour gust at 200 feet, I'm sorry, were more than the aircraft could handle. So we, our findings also are fly. This is important. I don't think people think about a lot. Fly with the payloads that are necessary for your mission. If you go back to here, I have a camera here that was not necessary for a daytime mission. I could see everything I needed to see from that camera. Why did I have that $14,000 payload on my drone that went in the ocean that didn't need it to? So fly with what's necessary. That extra weight might have helped me get back. That might have been the extra 5 feet I needed to land, right? So think about weight, think about payload. Don't leave with batteries that are less than 100%. That's a no-brainer, obviously. That was an oversight on my part, again, pilot error. One of the things that we did is we set our max distances for conditions. So the max distance that we fly now is 1 mile, 5,280 feet. From anywhere from the pilot to wherever the drone is no more than 5,280 feet. If we're over water, we even probably cut that down a little bit more. So we set those max distances for conditions. We also, something that I didn't, well, I did actually, we elevated our return to home levels and our warning levels. So used to be our return to home level was like 25%, and our return to home was 10%, and our warning level was 25%. We upped those to 35% and 20%. Give us a little more cushion to try to get home, because that kind of thing can sometimes get away with you. It shouldn't. You should always be paying attention, but let's be honest, sometimes it does. So we set our warning levels higher to give us a little condition. One of the things that I didn't write here because I didn't remember it was our return to home altitude. So we had 3 birds flying at one time. Don't set all your return to home altitudes at 190 feet because they will run into each other in the sky. So we adjust our return to homes to be different altitudes so that we don't have a situation where we have a collision in the air if we had a return to home or flyweight situation. We implemented a no questions asked refusal of the mission based on comfort. Any pilot is allowed at any time to say, I don't feel comfortable with doing this, and there's zero retribution to that pilot. And I probably would lose my mind if I saw somebody getting retribution for saying they were uncomfortable with something. So we put that into our plan. Just because you say it, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So for us, it had to be written into our plan. We implemented a much more detailed post-flight debrief so we could learn from ourselves, we could learn from others, and I included some of that in the next few slides. But those were basically the reports back to the senior staff and to the commissioners of our findings, and we self-reported, right? So we didn't have to have anybody do that for us. We self-reported, and it worked out okay. Our post-flight checklist, things you consider in the post-flight are the obvious stuff. Inspect your craft, make sure your motors are not unusually hot. Do you have cracks in your props? Do your batteries come out of the craft easily? Are they too hot? Does the craft need to be deconned due to hazmat? We've had those situations before. Check parts of landing gear, things like that to make sure they're secure. And then you sit around with the group. You know, you kind of as a group, you discuss, was this a success? Just because you completed the objective does not necessarily always mean your mission was a success. I think the group is the group that did it is the only ones that can decide, was there a success, was there a failure, could we have done better, right? What hazards were unforeseen? So talk about those things. Talk about when we got up there, there was birds in the area we didn't necessarily depend on. We recently had a drone go out of service because we were flying a lot of fog. And the unforeseen was, when those props are turning, it's literally shoving water into the front of the craft. And we ended up having a circuit board that controls the voltage for the batteries go bad. And so we kind of talked about that being unforeseen and what we would do in the future to protect from that, right? And in the end, also, we peer review. No one on the team can say anything in a respectful manner that is not taken seriously. We're very big on there are no stupid questions ever, and we allow our peers to tell us about our blind spots. And if you go ask your peers if you have blind spots, they'll tell you. You think you got 2, they'll tell you about 5 that you have. So that's how you learn to get better. As I said before, crashes happen to everyone if they fly long enough. How you handle your crash will make you a better pilot. Take immediate statements from people involved. Bring an independent, non-biased. I can't drive that home enough. Bring an independent, non-biased third party in to review your incident. That's not a bad idea to have a third party come in and review your training plan. Bring them in to train with you sometimes, because I promise you, they have experienced things you haven't yet, and you've experienced things they haven't yet. This whole thing, this whole drone thing is not about drones, it's about relationships. And at the end of the day, those relationships will save you or they'll break you. Can't say it enough, non-threatening conversations with your team. You have to support them. You don't have to be their best friend, but you have to be non-threatening about your conversation. Document your findings. Always document your findings. Even if you have no incidents, document the things that you had going on during your mission, because you may have something that goes wrong in a mission today, and you may not find it in that craft for 3 weeks. You can go back and you can look at the things that you did and kind of go, oh yeah, we were close to that. We were close to that tree. Maybe we struck it and we didn't realize it, or something like that. Document the things that you do so that you can go back and look at them later. Make adjustments to your training program. Should be a living document. It should not be a flat file document that you produce and you hand out to everyone who asks and say, hey, we've got the best training program in the world. I will tell you our training program is at 50% any given time, because there's always new technology. There's always new, who would have thought last week that the state of Texas would have been covered in inches of ice, right? So those folks in Texas, they probably don't have any consideration for ice. So their training program's got to get better to take into consideration what it's like if you wake up and have to go fly a mission where there's inches of ice on the ground. There's always things that you can do better with your training program. And if you believe that your training program is a flat file program, you're sadly mistaken, and you're doing it wrong. So I have a relentless bunch of folks that I work with that love me, and this is why I know they love me, because they pick on me. But this is what was hanging on my door when I got back from the drone crash, because, you know, good news travels fast. The whole world knew about it. So that was hanging on my door when I got back from my drone crash, and that's how I knew it was kind of be okay. Did you know that there are more airplanes in the bottom of the ocean than there are submarines in the sky? So that's kind of it, right? So that went a few minutes longer than I wanted to go, but kind of got what I wanted to get out. I definitely want to open the floor to anyone who's got questions, comments, anything you want to talk about.
Yeah, man, we definitely got some questions. If you want to go ahead and stop the screen share, and we can pop up big here.
Sure.
We do have some questions, so we can just jump right into those. And then I have a couple things that I've taken notes of that I would love to just kind of bring up. And I know, Antonio, if you have anything. But Tiziano has a few questions here that kind of relate to risk, safety, and adjustment. So I'm going to go through his collection of questions. He had asked, when you do mission planning for the exercise, did you check the weather aloft chart? And did you have a higher setting for battery reserves before starting the mission based off of that information? And I think you addressed it in the post-flight process, but if you touch on that again.
Absolutely. So if you look at the forecast, we use UAV forecast. And if you look at the UAV forecast for the place that we were standing at that time, the flight level winds at 200 feet were 28 to 30 miles per hour, right? Which is still within DJI's recommended. So you can't always trust necessarily what the forecast says, because if you live on the coast, you know that the weather changes very quickly. So you can't always trust what's in the forecast, but you have to have some place to start. And for us, we had checked that weather probably 15 minutes before we took off. As far as the battery reserves go, no, we didn't. That was something that came out of that situation where we started doing that in the future after that. So we got smarter because of it.
Awesome. And I know you definitely mentioned that, having to take into account, hey, if we know we're having higher winds, we're going to increase our emergency, or not emergency, we're going to increase our low battery warning, and we're also going to increase our return to home battery level warning in a sense. So do you have any training now related to human performance as a human factor has an impact on operations?
So, yes. So one of the things that we had implemented before this was for us, we call it the 30-30-30 rule. So we rotate a pilot out after 30 minutes. So they become a VO and then they go sit down, right? So if you know, we run these forestry missions that will fly for 12 hours. Well, if you're doing this for 12 hours, your eyes are no longer useful to you, and they'll lie to you over time. So from a human perspective, we start out with trying not to stress folks out as badly by doing a series of 2 or 3 hours of flight, because your mind just is not as sharp. And then we have some training in place where at any given time we'll do a lost link. We'll simulate lost link. And you don't always know when it's coming. And so how do you handle that? You can just be cruising along, talking to your buddy, and all of a sudden you have a lost link. What do you do with it? So we do lost link training. We also, we have an area where we can fly we have a lot of forest land around. So one of the things that we'll do is we'll fly to the very ends of where the controller can see the drone on purpose. And what we do is if you've ever done that, you lose video before you lose control. And so we'll fly them to the end of their video, and then how do you get yourself turned around coming home? Because at that point you have to use what telemetry you have on the controller, not necessarily what's on your screen. So we do some things like that to get you to think about what you have going on.
Okay. We had an anonymous attendee ask if you can comment a bit on how you knew you were in trouble. Like if you can, I know you probably hit on it during the presentation, but just to reinforce, Bruce, how did you know you were in trouble? And at any point, was the controls feeling weird? Was there speeds that you recognized? Was it the winds around you? And may have an additional VO helped you in this situation?
So the last question first, yes, an additional VO in this situation would have helped. So the way I knew I was in trouble was, like I said, about 4 minutes into that flight, when I turned around to try to start making my way back to, because I had gotten to the outside of where the boats were, when I turned around to start trying to make my way back in to get a better focus on where we were, when I was not making any headway in the wind, I knew I was in trouble. One of the things that I should have done sooner, and I know this now, is I should have come down in flight level much sooner than I did. I stayed at altitude too long. The controls didn't necessarily feel weird. Everything felt like it was supposed to feel, except for when I took my fingers off the controls and it went 20 miles an hour in the wrong direction. I knew that I was way in trouble. The best way to answer that question is I knew I was in trouble because I couldn't make any headway back home.
Okay, so you at one point it wasn't no control, it was, hey, I wasn't controlling the drone and the winds are actually moving it. And when you're trying to make that flight back to the shore, back to land, that's when you were recognizing like these speeds, we're fighting some serious wind here. Okay.
Yep.
Excellent. Someone was curious, because you mentioned 7,000 feet offshore. So maintaining visual line of sight, you've got really, obviously there's nothing in between you and the aircraft, and you've got that M200 with like the beacon on it. Were you using that? You were maintaining visual line of sight?
Yeah. So if you ever get a chance to fly at the beach, what you find is, especially on a pretty February day where the air is crisp, what you'll find is you can see forever and ever and ever. Like visual line of sight. I could still see the craft, and even during the daytime, we use red strobes during the day. I could see the red strobe clearly. I knew exactly where it was. So yes, you can see. That's a good question, and it's a reasonable question. But if we were in a forest somewhere, no, I could not have that kind of visual line of sight.
Excellent. And I think it's important to reiterate that because not everyone has operated at, distances up to a mile away. And I think people do want to know, well, hey, were you operating under line of sight operations or BV loss? And no, this was visual line of sight operations. So you mentioned it, Bruce, about reducing your height, because Matt asked much earlier, he asked, do you think the height of the drone contributed to the crosswind issues? And what he suggested is maybe do a test vertical flight, send the drone up, and maybe this is something that you want to talk about.
Yeah, so height definitely was an issue that day. In retrospect, that is a good suggestion. Is just pop up, see what you got right overhead instead of waiting to figure that out when you're too far out. I think as technology gets better, one of the things that we'll be able to find is that we'll be able to know what the environmental effects on a craft are real time. So you'll be able to know you're in a crosswind that's 40 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour, and you'll have that information at your fingertips. Until then, I think that is a good example. One of the things that I need you know, that I want to make sure that everyone understands is where I started and where I was a very different environment. When I took off from the beach, that 22 mile an hour wind was fine. Those conditions changed in about 3 or 4 minutes. That gust came along, that wind picked up, and it stayed. It didn't just gust and move on. It stayed. Those kind of environmental changes happen very quickly when you're at the beach.
So very
different things it does.
It went from a gust to a sustained wind. So gusting 25, 30 to a sustained wind, which, like you said, on the coast, that's something that happens. So I took a couple notes here, and on the manned aviation side, we talk about getting behind the aircraft. In the beginning, you mentioned how you were paying attention to maybe what was too far forward, and in a sense, you might have become too far ahead of the aircraft and not remaining aware to the telemetry. What conditions, as I move out towards my objective, you know, let's not get too far ahead and let's not get too far behind. So I think that was a good.
Absolutely.
And like you mentioned, if you had a VO that maybe could have watched ahead, given you some information, or, you know, helped support your situational awareness, at least for that specific portion of the flight. And in the wind, we're talking about the wind here, and you mentioned taking off with not fully charged batteries. And I think as you're flying out, we call it a tailwind, but in fixed wing aircraft, you can only fly in one direction. You can't stop and hover. So you either have a headwind or you have a tailwind. And in some cases you have a crosswind. With the drone, that tailwind, the moment you stop and come to a hover, that tailwind immediately becomes an enemy of the drone, because right. The moment you pause, you are fighting and you are flying in that direction. So please, if you want to just talk about how just hovering for a few minutes was severely depleting the aircraft's.
Certainly. One of the things that I didn't necessarily touch on in the replay was when you start looking at when you start looking at the estimated time you have left in flight for for how much battery you have, it would fluctuate from 16 minutes to 7 minutes, back to 14, back to 9, right? So that is all of that, right? That is it trying to fight itself in the wind. That is it trying to, where you point your payloads. I know that sounds probably a little crazy, but where you point your payloads made a difference to how quickly the battery was being depleted. A lot of factors there, but you can't always trust that little counter that says, "Hey, I got 30 minutes to fly." You can't always trust it. And definitely you're right where you're trying to hover. And I've only been in a situation that day where when I tried to hover, I couldn't hover, where it wouldn't hold its position. I've never had that. I've never had that situation ever happen again. So that's a weird thing too, to try to hold your position and seeing the camera got off course and you're like, what in the world? So you're trying to bring the drone back around. I don't like to turn, it's just a personal preference thing. I don't like to turn the camera. I prefer to turn the drone, keep the camera pointed in a direction, and I'll do up and down. That's just a personal preference thing, but it always helps me figure out if I get turned around, it always helps me figure out where am I going. So if your camera's off, kind of going off course, obviously the drone's moving in a direction that's not favorable, and you got to figure that out. So,
I'm muted.
Yeah.
Are we in Addy mode here? All of a sudden, but we've got a green bar at the top.
Right.
And you mentioned before, I want to give Antonio a moment if he has anything he wants to, any comments or questions, but you mentioned that before an hour or 50 minutes before the flight, your deputy chief kind of, he gave you that, no, you got this, like he encouraged you. He did what he's supposed to, which is, instill confidence. But the fact that you, the individual with experience, was a little bit questioning it, you've got to trust yourself. You've got to trust your gut. Even when people are giving you that, hey man, you can do it. You go, I know I can do it, but I don't think this is the right time to. So I think it's great that you pointed that out, that, hey, even if other people are, hey, you can do this, you've got to be able to self-check yourself and trust yourself and know your abilities. And I think you mentioned training, put people in through training. Antonio, is there any?
Yeah. Hey, Bruce. So I just want to say, just for everybody here on this call, to be able to, Bruce, put yourself on full display like this and just talk about a really terrible day. Just thank you so much for doing it. We're kind of, we get to play armchair quarterback, and so just thank you for your just authenticity in this. One thing that I wanted to ask real quick, you mentioned the lessons learned, and those are all so important. But the last time that we had you on, and on this one, you talked about the importance of relationships. In the previous webinar you helped out with, it was actually during the call, and how the relationships that you had grown enabled you to make that life-saving save in that case. In this one, it's after the incident, obviously. Can you just talk about maybe how you formed those relationships? Because sometimes it gets to be like fire and law, and it kind of can be a little awkward, but how did you navigate that?
Lunch. Lots and lots of lunch. So you can look at me, you can tell I'm not a small guy. I like to eat, right? So, I've worked with some of these folks for a long time, some I haven't. I think there's a couple of things for me that I find to be the most important things is, always have time for the people that are in front of you. If somebody's asking you a question, don't make them feel dumb. Even if it's an obvious question, answer it, because you were there, you were them one day, and you were asking that question at one time. So that is one thing. Just kind of reaching out to your the folks around you and kind of saying, hey, we got this going on. Are you interested in participating? So when we do have training, we had a barricaded subject Sunday morning. Kind of not a good situation. The info we had at the time was that two gentlemen had broken into a house and he had shot them both and barricaded himself. Turns out he had had a propane heater running all night, and he was hallucinating. But at the time we were heading to it, I haven't done a ton of multi-level indoor flights. I've done single-level indoor flights. But at the time, I hadn't done a lot of multi-level indoor flights. I picked up the phone and called a buddy that works in the Pender County Sheriff's Office that I know has, and said, "Hey, can you tell me? Can you give me any input as to what you might do?" And his initial response is, "I'm on the way." Right? Because during the riots that they were having, I went there and helped them on my own time, right? So you form those relationships. Like I said, you eat lunch with people. You truly find out what they're interested in. You give them what you got. If my documentation helps them, rock on, right? So really, I guess I don't really know the answer to that. I guess that's the best way I know how to answer it.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Well, we have reached an hour here. We don't want to hold anybody any longer past this. And I think that we have really gotten everything that we needed covered from this example of an incident where conditions were not exactly ideal. Conditions were very much variable from what was the norm, and we learned from it. So Bruce, is there anything, I just want to give you, you know, an opportunity to just give a last statement.
Sure. So again, I want to thank everybody for listening to me talk for 45 minutes. It's very cool of you to give me input. I actually learned 2 or 3 things here today, so thank you for that. I'm always available. Like I said, shoot me an email. If you're in an emergency, give me a call. I'd ask Paul to give out my email address to the folks that were here if anyone needs it. Anything that my team can do for you, we will. If it's the smallest, the biggest things, we're here to try to perpetuate the knowledge, right? So I'm an old man. I'm 47 years old. I'm not going to be doing this much longer. There's a next generation that's coming up, and you need to foster that generation because they're really the ones who are going to push this whole world of drones. They're really going to be the ones that push it into the everyday use. And if we don't teach them the right way, they will develop bad habits. So that's the way I know how to put it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bruce. And thank you to everybody who's joined in and tuned in and for all the great questions. Thank you, Antonio. This here's the Hard Lessons Learned series, part of the public safety UAS education outreach that we have going on. We're continuing from last year. Big thanks to 910 Drones and Fox Fury Lighting for helping, you know, put this together and get this information out. And stay tuned, everybody. We will get the recording for this sent out. It'll go out with Bruce's contact information for anybody that wants to follow up. And probably about 2 months here, we'll have our second Hard Lessons Learned. It's looking like we might be talking about return to home and how that cannot always be the home point that you thought it was. So more good stuff and more opportunities to learn and to avoid. As Warren Buffett said, it's great to learn from it's good to learn from your mistakes, but it's great to learn from others people's mistakes. And that's what we're doing. We're helping share the good, the rough, the interesting, and the hard. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Antonio. Everybody enjoy your evening, afternoon, and we will see you next time.